Hi, I'm Ann Wren, and I'm a part of the steering committee for the Black Lives Matter virtual online exhibit this year. And I'm so delighted to have Noah Scalin with me, who's one of the artists who's exhibiting. And he was the inaugural artist in residence at VCU School of Business. In addition, he co-runs an art and innovation consultancy called Another Limited Rebellion, which uses artistic practices to cultivate meaningful growth and change in individuals, organizations, and communities. In terms of his art, Noah is known for ingeniously repurposing materials from their traditional use and transforming them into works of art. To see these marvels, I encourage you to check out his website at noahscalin.com, and that's his name, NOAHSCALIN.com. You may have seen his portraits made of stickers or his portraits made of articles of clothing. Old Navy tapped into his skill by asking Noah to create a commercial which shows Noah creating a picture from clothing. Thank you for agreeing to chat today, and thank you for being a part of the 2021 BLM exhibit.
Glad to.
Wonderful. Okay, I want to recommend that our viewers again take a look at your website in order to take a look at the innovative examples of work there. The website features time-lapse videos that document the creative process from absolutely nothing to a fully detailed work of art. The works stand independently as vibrant works of art, and the video exposes the magic used to generate the images. So I'm so happy that you're here. And I wanted to ask you, you have a very interesting way of approaching the work that you've submitted. And you have a piece that's submitted that is called Fire Next Time, Olivia Hooker. And you said it was inspired after you read James Baldwin's book. And what does the fire next time mean?
Yeah, so The Fire Next Time is the title of a book that he wrote. And also it's a line from a spiritual that is a loose reinterpretation of an Old Testament phrase. And basically it's the idea of after the flood, that there was a promise made that it was like no more water, but the fire next time. And I just, the phrase, in context, obviously, because that book is about the civil rights movement and about the treatment of Black people in America, and the idea of the response, right? And I think that there's sort of, there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack about it, and especially as a person who's not Black talking about it. I don't claim any ownership over any of this stuff, but to sort of recognize that the Black community has sort of lived with so much grace in our society in terms of how terrible their treatment has been for so long towards the treatment of America has been towards Black people. And that when things bubble up and there's a response, especially like we experienced this past June, that there is that's that fire that like, it's like we can't hold back anymore. And it's been a long time coming. So sorry, I feel like that's not a great way of explaining a very complicated thing. But I pulled up the quote because I want to make sure. So it's from Mary Don't Weep, and it's Don't You Weep. And God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. And that phrase, the fire next time, is just stuck with me. I heard it a long time ago, and it's just such a powerful phrase. So I thought of it a lot
It
when we
is.
were in June.
Could you describe a little bit about Olivia Hooker to really reinforce why it's such a perfect quote?
Yeah, so Olivia Hooker I discovered her several years ago when there was a photo of her as a child shared in some articles. Basically, it was one of the big anniversaries of the Tulsa race massacre. And then that's a piece of American history that a lot of people didn't know about. It had been fairly well hidden and had been re-brought to people's attention for a variety of reasons, but just recently. And so this photo was shared of this beautiful little girl, just vibrant, positive energy, and it said age 6, and she's sitting with some luggage, and I was just like, gosh, this amazing photo. And then to read that she was one of the last living survivors at the time. She passed away a couple of years ago, but at the time she was one of the last living survivors of this massacre, and somebody who remembered it because she was 6 years old at the time, where there's just this devastation of what was considered the Black Wall Street at the time in Tulsa, by white citizens of the city. And it was, I have a daughter and who is now 7, and was, when I saw this image, was almost the exact same age, and thinking of her being exposed to a life experience like that. And then Olivia Hooker went on to have this amazing career. I mean, she ended up being decorated military personnel, was awarded by Obama, was a teacher, did so much in her life. And after experiencing such trauma, and was, again, this stuff is so complicated, and I always feel weird as an artist talking about it, because I'm not a historian. I'm somebody who's learning, and I share through my art what I learn. And so I'll glean all this knowledge and push it out through my artwork. But then when I have to talk about it later, I always get very anxious about getting facts and details right, because I want to represent it correctly. But yeah, so she's this amazing person, and I never would have heard of her had I not encountered this article and seen this photo, and then to sort of dig backwards through this horrendous history that I think is so important, that all of us should have been learning in school, and we hadn't. And so that was sort of the initiator of this piece of art.
So you saw an article about her with her picture in it,
Mm-hmm.
and that got you going and inspired.
Yeah. I have a little place where I collect physical images and then digital images that strike me as I'm, reading articles, looking, going through my regular day. And over the years, I've collected a handful of images that then I'll keep looking at and returning to and thinking about. And when the time is right, I'll pull them out for a piece, that like the sort of the stars align, and I'm like, this is finally the time that this image. So I'll hold on to them for years. I mean, I had that image for years and years before I pulled it out for this piece.
Now, I also noticed, as part of the Fire Next Time series, you did a portrait of a fellow named Cujo Lewis. Was it about the same process with him? Did you come across an article?
Yep, same thing. There was an article about Zora Neale Hurston's book Barracoon being published for the first time, even though it had been written in the 30s. And it accompanied it was this photo. And basically, this fellow was listed as one of the last living survivors of at the time that she had interviewed him, of the last ship that was part of the Atlantic slave trade that came into America well after it was illegal, even though slavery was still legal at the time. But importing enslaved people had become illegal. And so again, like there's something about this beautiful old man's face, just weathered, but still welcoming, and sort of this great presence. And this image was so striking, and again, referenced a history that I was completely unfamiliar with. And I held on to that image for several years as well.
Okay. And tell me about the local or national influences that inspired your creativity, if any.
Well, I grew up here in Richmond, and I have always been aware of our connection to American history through the Civil War and obviously Monument Avenue. When I was a kid, we sort of joked about those statues, but also I'm, again, not living as a Black person in Richmond. I thought they were terrible, but I also didn't feel the weight of what they meant. And over the last several years, as I learned more about their history, Bill Martin, who's the director of the Valentine Museum, shared a story at an event about the construction of the Lee Monument. And that was the first time I really learned when it was built and why it was built. because I think I had kind of assumed, like a lot of people do, that these monuments were sort of war memorials put up right after the war, and not these propaganda that was put up many years later as a means to support a, a retelling of history in favor of the losing side, sort of recasting their horrendous acts as a lost cause. So that's when I started rethinking sort of my own way of approaching talking about these things. And so that's been very important to me, again, over the last several years, thinking about I'm an activist, I'm a lifelong activist. My art always includes some connection to my ethics. I always want to talk about issues that are important to me through my work. And especially this year, last year, you know, race has become obviously something that is on the national, a national conversation is being had at last in a way that it needs to be. And so that was just on my mind. And then watching Richmond really explode in June, like so many cities did, and watching the Lee Monument get transformed into Marcus David Peters Circle, a commemorative space that is about, you know, healing in our community and talking about the issues that need to be talked about, and sort of reframing this horrendous statue into a positive space that can allow us to begin to move forward in a more thoughtful way. That whole moment in time made me want to revisit these images and think more about how I could continue that dialogue through my art. I felt some FOMO being home during a pandemic and not being out in the streets like the young people were, but I have a child, and I don't want to, I wasn't up for the risk of contracting COVID. So
Right.
I wanted to be participatory, and I've done that in a variety of ways, but through my art is one way I can do that. And so thought it was the right time to sort of tell these stories to the people that are on my networks about, you know, who these people were and what I learned about them, and just sort of sharing this history that was moving to me. So it's very much part and parcel of this moment, because I've been sitting on those images
And you have created this
and those pieces
process.
for a while.
For example, with Cujo Lewis and with Olivia Hooker, this process you use, using fire, which is a very element that was so instrumental in her life. Can you describe your process a bit? And is it more spontaneous? Is it planned? How much is
Yeah.
it planned?
So I had started working with matches as a medium several years ago as part of my Skull a Day project, and I really liked the result. And so then I did a show that was all about scientists who were involved in the creation of atomic weapons, and my sort of conflict about people who I respect and admire, scientists, and then like the outcome of their work, which I don't particularly care for, which is these incredibly destructive weapons that have transformed our world. And so I'd made these pieces using matches to talk about that explosive nature of their work. And so I would make these portraits, and then I would set them on fire. And I was sort of, I enjoyed working with this medium to sort of think about that potential that's in that fire. And after I did that show, I kept thinking about the medium, about returning to it, but I wanted to approach it a different way. And I'd been thinking a long time about how could I use the matches to make portraits rather than to make the portrait. Well, I did it that way too, but to have the burning of the matches create the portrait rather than the matches be the portraits. So the original ones, I'd make the portraits out of matches, set them on fire, but I wanted to set the matches on fire and make a portrait as the result. And so I'd been wanting to experiment with that. And so I liked the idea that I could take this medium, take this destructive thing happening of it being on fire, but leave a mark that was like a memory that lasted. And so I would work on wood and would set these matches on fire, and then the burn that would be sort of seared into this wood would be like the sort of scars that are left on our country from the acts of violence that have happened to different groups, including Black people. And so doing that process felt appropriate for the violence of the Tulsa race massacre and the fires that were lit and the people that were killed. But at the same time, here's this beautiful girl's face, and I wanted to do her justice. And so the piece was an experiment, and I did that burn. And when I finished, I looked at the result, and it was very striking. You could see there was a girl there, but it was, not all the detail was there. It's just sort of like the essence of her. But it was so dark, and it was so, and I mean dark emotionally, and it was so raw. And I was like, gosh, that's great. Except that this person had a full life. I mean, she lived to over 100, I believe, over 100 years old. So she, and in that life did so much and inspired so many. And I don't want to make her life about that one moment of pain and horror, even though it's so central and important to who her story is and the story of Black people in America. So, and I'd heard things too about saying, we need to make sure we're not sort of fetishizing that Black pain and sort of emphasizing it as sort of the whole of a story. And so I wanted to respect that. So I looked at the piece and I said, okay, as much as I think this end version of it is striking and worthwhile as a piece of art, I'm not going to stop here. And so then I decided for the first time to paint on top of something I'd done with that technique. So previously I'd burned things and then just shown them as is. So I said, okay, I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to pull out my paints, and I'm going to paint right on top of this. And there's no going back. I can't undo this. So once I do it, if I made a mistake, that piece is destroyed, and that's the end of that. And so I pulled out my paints and started painting. And when I paint, I sort of use a palette that I've developed from working with clothing and stickers and other materials, where there's sort of these very bright, vibrant colors that are combined to make images that don't have like typical skin tones in them. I try to use these yellows and pinks and oranges to blend together to create an image that is about everybody being made of these same colors. Yeah. So I painted on top of this thing and sort of brought her out of it. And so then the black of the carbon of the burned matches becomes that background, the sort of history, the story behind her. But now her beautiful, vibrant energy is on top of that, in front of that. And so because this is such a process-oriented way of working, I document all of it, all of the things I do, so that the end result is this finished physical piece of art, which you can certainly see and can be hung up, but really it's about the whole journey of it. And so when you watch the painstaking process of laying out the matches very carefully, the process of burning them, the process of then seeing that burn and then covering it up with the paint, all of that is the piece rather than just the finished product.
Uh-huh. And as you were working on this, did you gain any new understanding or new realizations?
Yeah, the thing about any of the work that I do that's like this, that's very time consuming and painstaking, sticker art is like that as well, clothing art, is I spend a lot of time with the subject. And I think in my life, I come across something, an image, a story, and I know a lot of other people are like this, that we see them and then we move on. It's a glance, it's a moment, you might feel something, but then you keep going with life. And you probably don't spend more than a few moments with them. And so making work like this forces me to spend a long time with somebody, looking at them, researching them, thinking about them, learning about them. And it is my sort of way of meditating on their lives and circumstances. And I hope that my time spent with them creating this piece then gives other people an opportunity to spend time with them. And so I always learn more. I didn't know any of these details about these people. I saw their image and learned a tiny bit, but learned a lot more in the process.
Wonderful. What understanding would you like the viewer to have after watching this video of your creative process? What kind of an understanding about the work and about the process?
I appreciate you saying like that it's showing the magic behind it, because I've always felt like I want my work to be accessible in a way that maybe people will think, well, that they could try something like that they could approach things differently, and maybe the materials in their lives a little differently. And especially when I'm working with everyday things, that they might start thinking, gee, what potential is in this stuff that I haven't really looked at that much before. And at the same time, because they're spending more time watching me working with those materials on this subject, that they might also spend some more time thinking about that subject, and why I've made those choices and who that person is. So hopefully it's engaging in a way that you want to spend time watching it, and in turn are learning more than if you had just seen it in passing as a static image.
Do you think that doing these processes like this um, are something that stimulates people in business to create new products or practices? I know that you consult with people on creativity. What do you recommend people do on a daily basis if they want to foster their creativity?
Yeah, my business that I run with my sister, who's my business partner, is all about sharing the practices of artists so that people can, find their own creative core and use that to help them do better at their work and in their lives. And you said, what should you do daily? And I like that, because really that's all we really, at a base level, what we want people to do is practice their creativity, that to treat it as something that you can improve by practicing, because a lot of times people think of creativity as the solely owned by the creative types, the artists. And what we want to say is everybody is creative, everybody has potential to be creative, even if they don't feel like it. And it's really just about tapping into something that's in you, but giving you an opportunity to practice it so you're better at it. It's a skill, not a talent. So that's where we really approach the way we work with the business community and folks that are interested in developing their creative side, is through the idea of small creative acts done daily, and really shifting the idea from trying to do big things. I mean, looking at a finished work of art, it's a lot of time and effort that goes into them. So understanding that it's really about a set of small actions that add up to it. And so when you watch somebody making something and you realize, okay, well, here's their actual process, that's helpful. But to also encourage people to just not have everything be these giant finished things, but little things. I'm constantly doing little experiments, and trying things and playing and putting things out there in the world. And that's the stuff that helps you find your new ideas and push yourself to try things that you might not have done before. So, I mean, this piece is a good example of that, me doing an experiment in the midst of doing a piece and not knowing what the outcome will be, but taking that risk because I know it's worth it to take a risk, because I've learned that in my own practice.
Okay, great. Can you tell us a little bit more about Another Limited Rebellion, and if a company were interested in contacting you in order to expand their creative potential, how would this happen?
So Another Limited Rebellion, as we were discussing, is focused on teaching the tools of artists to folks in the business world, or as well as in school settings and community organizations. And really going through our website is a great way to find out what we do, how we do it, and see if it's right for you. So anotherlimitedrebellion.com is the website. And yeah, I'd love for people to check out that side of things. I'm really excited that I can spend my time as an artist in the studio making art, but also reaching a much broader audience through my work as a consultant. And it's a really satisfying pairing, which I never would have imagined I'd be doing.
Wonderful. Well, Noah,
Because
thank you so much.
I thought my background is in art.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting, and I appreciate everything you've shared, and I'm sure that our viewers will as well. So thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.